All right. It's about time. Let's see if we have people. Let's give 1 minute for people to join. How's everybody feeling today? Good?
It's Friday, right?
Friday, exactly.
I actually don't know what day of the week it is. It's all the same to me, but I hear it's Friday.
This Wednesday, it was Saturday for me, suddenly. I don't know how. All right. Okay. So thank you so much for investing your time with us and joining from different time zones of the world. My name is Smriti. I'm Director of Product at The Mighty and also your moderator for this event. And currently I'm quarantining in Asia. So it is truly World Mental Health Day. So for our topic today, humans across cultures grapple with their shadow side, experiencing shame, fear, or repressed anger. And the goal of this panel will help the community to learn how we can collectively strive for mental well-being by cultivating more compassion, less judgment, more kindness towards ourselves and others. Um, so I did mention shadow side. Shadow side is referenced in psychology, philosophy, religion, and art. In Buddhism, for example, before attaining enlightenment, Buddha had to acknowledge his shadow side and had to fight Mara, the devil of temptation, as depicted in many Buddhist stories and paintings. And fast forward a little bit, Carl Jung, the famous psychiatrist, had created something called Map of Soul, or his theories. And he defined things like personas, the faces of individual presented to the world. He called them like kind of a mask designed on one hand to make definite impression upon others, and on the other to conceal the true individual identity of the individual. In the same work, Jung also mentions the shadow side of individuals. The shadow is an unconscious aspect of personality that people are not consciously aware of. So they do act based on their shadow side, but they're just not aware that they have one. And the work, as I mentioned, is called Map of Soul. And even fast forward to recent times, BTS, a K-pop group that I personally admire, released several musical album titles called Map of the Soul and Love Yourself, where they depict this journey from self-rejection to self-love within the same psychological framework. And they show through their songs that once you start on the path of self-realization, it is followed by a struggle to answer who you really are without your persona, and the disconnect that exists between the persona and your real self. The self-love that we are constantly talking about is not the narcissistic love that many people attribute to self-love, but one that is rooted in compassion for not just ourselves, but also others. We can also continue to talk more about these Jungian theories as we have someone amongst us today who knows these really well. Um, but before that, format-wise, we'll take a few moments for each panelist to briefly introduce themselves, because we have some really awesome people today, and tell a little bit about their background in the industry. I'll then kick off the conversation asking some questions centered around this journey from shadow to self-love. And in the end, we'll leave few minutes for the audience to ask questions. All right, so without further ado, let's get started with panel introductions. I see Frank first, so I'm going to ask Frank to introduce himself.
Hey everybody, I'm Frank Warren, the founder of PostSecret. For over a decade now, strangers from around the world have been mailing their secrets to me on postcards, and it's been an extraordinary experience and journey. For example, one person made a postcard out of a Starbucks cup. Put my home address, a stamp on it, and their secret was, I serve decaf to customers who are rude to me. Here's another one I got recently.
Oh, wow.
Are any of us okay? I don't think so. So in my time with you today, one of the things I'd like to do is share with you some of the secrets I've received recently about the pandemic and the struggles that we have, but also the successes and strategies of getting through them. And to tie the idea of PostSecret to our shadow selves, one of the things I think about is how our secrets are related to dark matter in the universe. As you may know, most of the universe now is attributed to dark matter, matter that we cannot see or sense in any way except the gravitational pull it has on other bodies. And I think most of who we are is also kind of hidden or in the shadow, maybe controlling our behavior or attitudes in ways we don't understand. And the more we can share our secrets, we can shine light on our hidden selves individually and collectively. I think it allows us to become more of who we are and maybe even introduce a sense of healing to the community. So that's what I'll be trying to do today.
Thank you, Frank. Dr. Ong, or Anthony.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Anthony Ong. I'm a psychologist and professor at Cornell University, where I do research on stress, emotions, and health, and where I teach a class on the science of well-being. And I'm looking forward to being a part of this important discussion today.
Thank you. And last but not least, Dayle.
Hi, I'm Dayle McLeod. I am an actress, a musician, and an author, as well as an initiated Zulu shaman. A huge part of shamanic work is dealing with your own personal shadow so that you have the capacity to help others through their shadow work, as well as dealing with the collective shadow. So everything that we just shoved to the side within our culture is also alive in us. So I help to work with people, bringing them shamanic techniques that will support them in shadow work, because it is, in my experience, quite difficult to face all of the things that you're afraid of. So I want to support people in that. And I also help people create art, because art is an amazing way to digest experiences. And it's an amazing way to approach your shadow and create beauty out of it, and also be witnessed inside of your shadow. Yeah, so I'm really excited to contribute to this conversation. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dayle. All right, so we'll begin with our first question. Very excited. What does embracing your shadow self mean to you in your journey with mental health, or experience working with others struggling with this concept of shadow? Does anybody want to take it?
Yeah, so for me, working with the shadow has been an incredibly empowering experience, because, like you mentioned earlier, when you're dealing with the shadow, it's everything that you've sort of cast aside that you don't think is part of your personality, or that you think that is unacceptable to this concept of yourself that you have. So you might shove all of your guilt, all of your shame, all of your rage into this one area of the psyche that is dark, that you don't have to look at, but it's still alive, and it still has an impact on the way that you're behaving in your life. So like I mentioned earlier, you have your own personal shadow, where you're going to put experiences that are really difficult to hold, or maybe traumatic experiences that are really difficult to process. And only now mental health education is coming out. So in the past, maybe you have some stuff that hasn't been worked through before. And then in terms of the collective shadow in Jungian psychology, in which I'm a student of, it's recognized that there are 4 major archetypes or psychological templates that exist within the communal shadow. And those are the victim, the child, the whore, and the saboteur. We all have these so-called negative or dark aspects of the self that are trying to bring different parts of who we are to the surface. And once you start to accept the fact that, first of all, you have those emotions, you have those feelings, you are a human being who experiences the full spectrum of experience and the full spectrum of emotions. Once you can learn to accept that, and accept that we have these parts that want to come out in certain situations, then you're aware, and you can become empowered by knowing that, like, okay, right now I'm in a victim mentality. I know that it's there, but I'm going to choose differently so that I'm not behaving and creating a life that's based in my victimhood. Or I know that I have this saboteur who tries to ruin everything before I even get started. Once you know that that's present and that's alive in you, again, you can take that part of you out of the driver's seat and start making conscious decisions because it's inside of your awareness.
Thank you, Dayle. Frank, since people share a lot of secrets from around the world with you, do you think the greatest burden from hiding part of ourselves comes from the secret itself or the shame we feel from it?
We're talking about our shadow selves today, and I think that ties in directly to the idea of shame, self-concealment, feeling alone. And I see that reflected in especially the secrets I'm receiving recently. I've never received so many secrets about one topic as I have the pandemic. And I loaded a few to share with you right now about the specific struggles people are going through. So I wonder if we can bring those up. There we go. So this first postcard that was mailed to me says, I'm trying real hard not to do this, and panic. Certainly something we can all relate to. This is a postcard I received months ago at the beginning of the pandemic, but I feel like it has this renewed meaning for us today. When the pandemic started, I think there was a sense of pulling together, a sense of heroism, maybe even adventure, looking outward rather than inwards. Remember the times we were talking about making masks for ourselves and Tiger King. And now months later, the sprint has turned into a marathon. And so maybe it's even more important to take a self-assessment of ourselves and look at that shadow self and examine it and talk to our friends and family and make sure they're okay too. Here's another one that I got recently. It's a worldwide pandemic and I'm starting an affair, no regrets. I'm not sure this is a good example of this idea I want to convey, but in the midst of a pandemic, there are possibilities of having meaningful relationships, precious moments, awesome times of seeing ourselves within nature. So as there are these struggles, let's keep our eyes open for the pandemic wins because they are available. This was a postcard that came to me on a wedding announcement. We don't need the big fancy wedding. Thanks for the reminder, COVID-19. Maybe an example of how the pandemic allows us to see our world and ourselves and our relationships in a different way that we can draw value from. Just a couple more I'll share with you. One should never have to watch their grandpa's funeral on Zoom. This one really hits you in the heart. And maybe not all of us have a story like this that can express the feeling of grief connected to pandemic so directly. But all of us have experienced a sense of loss. If nothing else than just the loss of what our old world used to be. And so whatever that struggle, that sacrifice, that loss that you're feeling is, it doesn't have to be something grand or on this scale for it to be valid. So one message I'd like to share with you is the grief or depression or loss you feel is valid. Face it, talk about it, it's legitimate. There is no comparison of grief. We're all going through our own struggles and they all count right now. And then this last one I'll share with you. People think AA is about finishing the 12 steps. It's not. It's about sharing the struggles of following the steps with others. I'm scared. What a terrific reminder that for all of us, recovery is connected directly to relationships and contact, something that has been lost during this pandemic and affecting many of us in surprising ways that we might not have been prepared for. And the last line the person wrote, I'm scared. I think a lot of us, just like at the beginning, I'm panicked. We have these connections to feelings and emotions that are a little bit uncomfortable and unusual. And one thing that has worked for me as I have struggled and navigated through this time is to take these emotions and give them a sense of distance and specificity. So for example, this person writes, I'm scared. What has worked for me is to say something like, I've noticed that when I read the news too much, I notice a sense of anxiety welling up inside of me. I think instead of saying, I'm anxious, if we can connect that feeling to something specific and draw some distance from it, I'm feeling this way, doesn't necessarily mean I am this way. So we have to feel before we can heal, and we can see that we're not alone with these struggles right now, for sure.
Right. Thank you so much, Frank. Piggybacking on that, why do you think it is sometimes easier to tell your secret to a stranger than to family or friends?
It does sound paradoxical how you'd feel more at ease maybe telling your secret or confession to a stranger sitting next to you on an airplane than your mother or your spouse or your child. But I think sometimes we feel a sense of shame. We feel a sense of isolation with these stories that we keep tightly inside of us. But if we can find a way to let it out, to out ourselves, no matter what that secret is, I think we instantly find out that that secret that we thought was a barrier separating us from others was really a bridge, connecting us with others, connecting us with our deepest selves. And so to be vulnerable and courageous at this moment is even more important.
Yeah, that's so true. Why is it important for people to recognize the beauty of embracing the shadow self?
For me, it's really about empowerment. There is so much healing inside the shadow. And once you become conscious of what's happening inside your shadow, then you can start to consciously make new decisions. And I think especially now, like we're experiencing the shadow of our entire culture, like with the Black Lives Matter movement, systemic racism, with the climate. All of these things have been in the darkness. And so when you're looking at your contribution to these things that might be unconscious, or the way that you're contributing to these systemic problems, it can be so difficult because you're in the shadow, but it becomes so empowering because you're literally creating a new paradigm with who you are being and who you are showing up as in the world, with someone who is conscious of the way that your actions matter and the influence that you have on others, not just like on social media, but the people that you live with, or the children in your family, or the person that you're picking up your food from. Who you're being has such a huge impact. And so when you're aware, like for Black Lives Matter, for instance, if you start to become aware of how you might be contributing to those problems, then you can stop it. But before you take any action, like the work has to be done, where you're recognizing maybe the like crimes of your ancestors that are really fucking heavy, or ways that you've behaved in the past that was just cultural conditioning. You have to sit with that, and you're not going to get to the healing right away. You have to be with it and then learn how to integrate those changes into your life. But I personally find it so empowering to be aware of my shadow and to have it integrated in my being as well.
Thank you, Dayle. Yeah. My next question is for you too. So you wrote this book about your personal transformation journey. When someone struggles with their community not accepting them, how would you suggest they can still move towards self-love and live their own truth?
Yeah, so I was thinking about that because I feel two ways about it. First of all, I really think that you need to go to where you're valued. You need to find places where you're going to be like recognized and valued. Like, for instance, I'm an artist, and growing up in a very small town, art wasn't recognized as valuable. And so all of my character traits of being really sensitive and really emotional and very dramatic and loving poetry instead of, wanting to go play soccer, it was all very like, oh, I'm not okay where I am. And so I'm going to So the answer was to find people and to like go into theater groups where all of those parts of me were not only like accepted but celebrated, and those were actually my strengths, where I'm in a place where what I have to offer is actually valued. And then I also, on the other side, feel like so often we feel like our community is not going to accept us, when really it's just a problem of communication. And I think especially now in the pandemic, like I know so many people, including myself, who have had to come back home. And these hometowns, like for me, it's a very small, historically very white and racist town, but I'm here, and I want to be able to create community and to be able to express myself, and to have a kind of a quality of communication that allows more acceptance. And that goes just with learning on how to communicate. So I think before like saying like, oh, these people just don't accept me and like whatever, I think there might be a way that you can communicate who you are and why it's important for you to be accepted, and also to create acceptance for others. So yeah, I feel those two ways about it.
That's really beautiful. So you can create your own community wherever you are. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be. Yeah, that's nice. Anthony, what do you think is kindness? I think kindness has been defined multiple ways. And what role do you think kindness plays in loving oneself?
Yeah, thank you. I'll start by saying that I think the social science does echo some of the points that both Frank and Dayle have given voice to. To your question about kindness, I think of kindness as a behavior or action that we make to benefit another person. And here I think there's some really cool science to suggest that some of our intuitions about kindness are just wrong. So, we have this misconception, for example, that nice people finish last. But the research here suggests differently, that when we help others, we're also helping ourselves. So when people spend money on other people, they end up happier. When people spend time helping others, they feel less stressed. When people are genuinely motivated to help out of empathy for others, they feel less lonely and more connected to others. And so there's lots of evidence, I think, that being there for others also helps us.
Thank you. I have never had kindness defined to me so well before. Frank, people show their vulnerable side to you through PostSecrets. What role do you think vulnerability plays in loving oneself?
Vulnerability is being talked a lot about right now, and it's a very complex emotion. There's this sense that it's about sacrificing something in a way for a future benefit for ourselves or others, but there's a risk in putting ourselves out there. I think that in so many ways, if we look back over our lives, though, we'll recognize areas where we thought something that was embarrassing or made us look a certain way or conflicted with who we thought we were, and we kept it inside and private. Once we found the courage to let it go, we could instantly see that we were never alone with that secret. And by telling our stories, it doesn't just give us a greater sense of who we are and help us become who we are, but by being vulnerable, it can also create this cascade of sharing and other people telling their stories. So if it makes it any easier, maybe talk about a vulnerable experience with a friend or family member, not for your benefit, but because it will create a safe place and allow them to feel comfortable sharing their vulnerable truths.
So we all have to be vulnerable to actually be able to create that community or connection with others.
Yeah, I do a lot of speaking. I used to do a lot of speaking on college campuses. I still travel some, but most of it is virtual now. At these live events, I invite audience members to share their secrets live, not on postcards, but at a microphone. But before I would ever do that, I tell my own secret first. I kind of take that first step into vulnerability. And really, it's a very powerful relationship, the idea of rapport and connection and being intimate. One of the things I've discovered about not just postcards, but our secrets, are that secrets are the currency of intimacy. They allow us to better understand ourselves, others, our relationship with them in the most meaningful ways. And sometimes that's not pain-free, but that's okay. I've thought about what tattoo I would have on my body if I ever decided to get one. And what I've come up with is one that I would put on my arm that says simply, just the right amount of pain. And I think if we can think about that idea through life, that there's this optimum amount of pain that keeps us on the edge and alive and dynamic, while at the same time not causing too much suffering. That's a sweet spot to be. The ideal is not to avoid pain completely, but to find the spot that allows you to really be who you truly are.
I really like that secrets are currency of intimacy. It's I might use it sometime. So, Dayle, I know you have a framework that you could share with us today as an example of how we can choose love, self-love in challenging times.
Yeah. So basically, the framework comes from nonviolent communication, which is a form of communication developed by Marshall Rosenberg, who knew that language, having that the natural state of being is to have compassion. So I want to give you this example. So currently, for the pandemic, I've been living at my mom's house, and she has a boyfriend, and he's into this keto diet. And I don't know if you've ever heard of keto, but it's like pretty extreme. And you like don't eat any carbs or any sugar and like all this stuff. So I was sitting at my dinner table eating a bowl of pasta, as I do. And he said to me, like, don't you know that's going to make you fat? And I became so triggered by that and so like enraged. And then I had shame on top of the rage because I was like, I shouldn't be so mad, but I'm so triggered. And in the nonviolent communication framework, in order to give compassion to someone and kindness to someone, you first have to have compassion for yourself. So this is also a great example of how the shadow can come up, because when he said that, all of a sudden I was so triggered by like the history of fat phobia in our culture. The fact that growing up as a woman, my value was put into how I look or how much I weigh. And that hurts. Like eating disorders come from those kinds of things. And so going self-kindness and self-love for me was to sit with all of that emotion in the shadow and to just love myself through it. So for me, that means getting a massage, sitting in the sauna, talking to my therapist, talking to one of my NVC empathy buddies, just getting some light and getting some empathy from others on it. And then going to the NVC framework, basically when you're communicating, you want to first make an observation that's completely objective about what has happened. And then you want to express how you feel, how that has made you feel. And then you express the need behind that feeling. And then you make a request that would help to make life more wonderful. So in this instance, I had to say, listen, I noticed that when you said that my pasta was going to make me fat, that I felt hurt and I felt ashamed and I felt angry, because what I'm needing is a celebration of my body. I'm needing a celebration of the fact that it works, and it doesn't matter if it's fat or skinny or whatever. And I have a need for autonomy as well. I get to decide what I put in my body. And so then the request afterwards to make of him would be to make my life more wonderful. I had to ask, when you see me eating something, instead of saying that it's going to make me fat, could you maybe say that it looks really delicious and that you celebrate the fact that I am a grown woman who can make my own choices, that would be amazing for me. So it starts with it had to start. I wouldn't be able to say that to him with compassion and have it be authentic if I hadn't taken those 3 days to be inside that shadow work and to be holding myself there, loving myself there, and acknowledging the fact that I deserve compassion for those feelings. And then my cup was full enough that I could offer him some compassion and act in a way that was aligned with my own integrity and the peace that I want to create in the world and the harmony that I require in my environment. So it's a beautiful framework. If any of you guys don't know about it, you just Google NVC. It's a beautiful process.
I absolutely love it. I definitely plan on using it too. I do find myself in situations like that often. Thank you, Dayle. Anthony, how can kindness manifest in a day-to-day, especially now when we are all experiencing various levels of trauma with this global pandemic?
Yeah, so I think this is an important question. In my mind, there are two stories or narratives that we hear about how people respond to great adversity, including disasters. The first narrative is what we see, in the media. So I think of movies like The Purge, right, where the idea is that when people go through disaster, they ignore the rules that govern their everyday lives. And what does this reveal? It reveals that people are selfish, that they desire to put themselves above others. The second narrative is that disasters can bring out the best in people, where people are kind, not just to their neighbors, but also to people who they've not met, but with whom they share an identity of struggle. And I think that, in the initial days and weeks of this pandemic, we saw people act selfishly, hoarding toilet paper and, selling Purell for, 20,000% profit. But perhaps I think much more common were the acts of kindness that we've all, witnessed around the world. So, for example, in my own little town of Ithaca, I remember seeing, these Google spreadsheets of mutual aid where, relatively healthy and able-bodied people were offering help to their more vulnerable community members. I remember, seeing on social media in the early days, nurses and other medical staff, answering the call and getting on these buses to go down to New York City to help care for, COVID-19 patients. And so the question that, that I have is, can we turn this, the kindness of this moment, again, born out of this shared struggle, into something more lasting?
Yeah, I think we definitely have seen acts of kindness pop up across the world. I remember reading in India, there was a chef who fed like 50,000 people on a daily basis. So, yeah. What are some of the physical and mental effects of experiencing loneliness and social isolation long term? And do you have suggestions for coping with this? Because we don't know how long we are going to be in this pandemic. Hopefully
Yeah,
not
so
long.
I think, and this is the sort of research hat here speaking. I think we tend to run together these concepts of loneliness and social isolation when I think it may be helpful to separate them. So researchers tend to think of social isolation as the objective condition of having few contacts with other people. In contrast, loneliness is the subjective feeling of being alone. And I think this distinction between loneliness and isolation may help explain why it is that some people who report belonging to a large social network may nevertheless feel lonely. So you can be lonely in a crowd, you can be lonely in a friendship, in a marriage,
Yep.
Conversely, people may feel energized being isolated. I have a friend who claims that he's living his best life under quarantine. Which makes me think, what does this say about our friendship? In terms of your question of the physical and mental health effects of loneliness and isolation, it's a serious issue. So meta-analyses that synthesize the relevant data indicate that having fewer and poorer relationships is associated with early mortality. And when benchmarked against leading causes of mortality, our best guess is that the magnitude of this effect is equivalent or even exceeds that of obesity. So combating loneliness and social isolation is a real public health priority, and there are campaigns now in the U.S. and in countries like the U.K. To prevent loneliness and isolation.
Wow.
Finally, in terms of your question about coping, I think the current global pandemic that we're all in, I think poses some unique challenges, to our impulse for personal interactions and in-person connection. I think technology has been touted as a way of solving the physical distancing challenge that we're all experiencing. But I think it remains to be seen whether technology can help alleviate this feeling of isolation and loneliness that some of us may be experiencing. And I think the science here suggests that genuine connection, the kind that leaves us feeling seen and understood, this is not scripted. These arise spontaneously in our everyday interactions with others. And so, if I could, make one plug for technology and social connection, it's to give, spontaneity a chance. So we might do well to try to, tap into technology to try to replicate some of the, the casualness of the sort of in-between moments that are, characteristic of our offline interactions. And I think this is going to be give us this sort of vital sense of connection that we're all longing for.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm one of those people who the isolation is doing really well for. Like, I'm working out, which I was not before. So, one more question I have, and this is just a curiosity, because a lot of people tend to feel that they are like outsiders or other. They tend to not fit in sometimes. So they end up finding these group of individuals who are sort of similar or accepting of them, and form these smaller communities, but they don't venture out because that's their comfort zone now. Do you think, in your experience, does that promote or deter well-being, like being part of these smaller communities, not venturing out? Like, I can see both sides, but I would really love to get your take on it.
Yeah, so having questioned the limits of technology for connection, I'll say that for some people, and here I'm actually thinking of people who Frank's work has given voice to, some people are really starving for a connection and just unable to get this from their community. And here I really do think that technology can play a role. So I'm thinking of a book by the psychologist Jamil Zaki called The War for Kindness, where he describes people who suffer from rare illnesses, who don't know anyone in person who shares their struggles. And many of these individuals overcome their social isolation by finding connections online. And in this book, he describes these online communities as oases of empathy in a lonely world. And so I think if there's a lesson to be learned in this, it's that we all need these kinds of spaces, and why not create them if they don't already exist.
This next one, I think recently a documentary was out on Netflix called The Social Dilemma, talking about like the advent or the spread of social networks and how it has impacted mental health as one of the things. Um, and this might be for everybody. So for every generation, like society has set impossible standards, like you're too thin, you're not thin enough, you're too tall, like Dayle was saying about like the body image. And most of the time people are not able to meet those standards. So this idea of being perfect then leads to lack of mental wellness. Um, so now with these social networks, this effect is far and more widespread amongst our communities. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I might, if I can chime in, I'll say that this is a big one, especially for young people who I see and work with in the university setting. We've talked about loneliness earlier. I think nationally, upwards of 70% of U.S. college students report feeling very lonely.
Oh.
And, it seems to me that this obsession with perfection for the best grades, for the best body, for the best relationship, the Instagram version of ourselves, again, really runs counter to what the science tells us about what makes us healthy and happy. And psychologists actually have a name for this. They call it miswanting, which is this sort of mistaken notion of what and how much how much we will like something in the future. And I think this is the problem, I think, with our obsession with perfection, which is that, our brains deliver to us this idea that we want certain things. We want, perfect grades, we want the perfect body, but we're wrong about those things. And, in effect, we're constantly, miswanting here.
Mm-hmm. Interesting word, miswanting.
And another thing, the first thing that came up for me when you asked that question was actually the fact that through social media, there has been so much dismantling of that requirement of being perfect. Like I'm thinking of someone like Jamila Jamil, who is an actress and advocate for body image. And she's huge online, and she has made such a big impact with like stopping Instagram from selling these like tummy teas, or like that are basically diuretics, and they're really, really bad for you. And with the advent of social media as well, you have lots of models who are claiming their beauty for themselves and saying, I don't need your systemic body shaming within the modeling industry. I have Instagram and I can take beautiful pictures myself. And there's, for me on my end, I'm seeing a lot of like positive change where so many people are learning to accept themselves and others. So many marginalized people are doing this. I do understand that like depression has been huge among like in that documentary you were talking about because of that. But I also see a lot of change.
Yeah, that's true. Like there is a positive and then there is a side effect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Frank, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think in many ways we find what we look for, and you can find everything on the web in positive ways and negative ways. I was reminded about how when I was in high school, it was tough to kind of find my tribe. It took skateboarding, Rocky Horror Picture Show, punk rock, before in my small town, I felt like I had some meaningful connections. Mm-hmm. But technology today, I think, allows young people from their home to reach out and find those connections to people who have similarities to them that they might not find in their own hometown. So the idea that you can Google your tribe now, rather than going out when I was young and trying to find it in a very complicated way in a small town, I think that's a huge benefit. And I'm also inspired by young people who are unsatisfied with the way things are, and they're taking conversations and feelings about mental wellness and redefining it for their world. recently there was an app created by two young people, brother and sister. One was concerned about the depression of the sibling, and so they created this app called Not Okay. And it's by young people, for young people, redefining mental wellness in a new progressive way, bypassing the broader culture and kind of top-down thinking and tradition about mental illness. So for me, there's lots of different inspiring points to find and discover. They're definitely out there.
Thank you. Interesting app. I have to check out. So on that notion, like, what does having a safe space mean to each of you? Like, can one create their own safe environment even though an external safe environment is not offered to them? And like, how so?
Yeah, one of the things that came up for me when I read this question was that a yoga teacher, a friend of mine, were talking about how safe spaces actually don't exist, and you can't create safe spaces because conflict is like a part of who we are. And actually, like, there's this saying that violence is the absence of conflict. And so for me, I know that I feel the safest when I am actually with someone who has done all their shadow work. And because I know that they're not going to be operating in unconscious ways. I know that they're probably mindful of their impact on another. And there's a sort of like level of empathy when you can process and travel through your suffering. I've found that it gives you a greater capacity for empathy. And I've noticed that since I've been doing shadow work, you sort of give off this aura of safety, and people will just start telling me things. And I don't create a safe space for them. I am a safe person. And so when people come to me with these kinds of things, I also have had to learn how to really listen. And a safe place for me is for someone who is just going to listen. Like, so often we hear a friend's problems and we want to fix them, or we want to offer advice, or we want to side with them, or we want to side with the other, or, but the art of just listening and compassionately inquiring and finding out how they're feeling about something, that's a skill that I think has to come through self-exploration, through shadow work, through self-acceptance. And then your vibe, your aura will be safe. But in terms of like creating a safe place, I don't know how to do that. And I'm also reminded of this amazing series, I May Destroy You. I don't know if any of you guys watched that, by Michaela Cole, where she experiences a sexual assault. And then she goes to this sexual assault group where they create a safe place. But really, it's not safe because it's a group of people who are really hurting and who need help traveling through their trauma, but instead are just coming together and bitching or whatever. And it ends up not being a safe place. So for me, forming like a safe bond would just be with someone who is really in touch with themselves and is able to listen to how another person is feeling.
So Frank, this might be for you. How do we as mental health advocates continue to strive to create possible safe spaces, or like, as Dayle was saying, like whatever your definition of safe space is for others who are struggling?
Yeah, safe space is something that we can really think about and talk about right now. I think I've shared some statistics from Active Minds. There was a survey made of over 2,000 students just a few weeks ago. And there were some pretty insightful revelations about what young people are going through right now with mental wellness, with reaching out to peers for mental wellness help. And there was also some optimism about looking into the future. And so for me, I think young people can be very inspiring. They're brave enough to share their truth and offer ways to help us get through it. And what I'd like to do is go to my presentation one more time and share some self-care ideas that young people have shared with me on postcards. This was a postcard that was mailed to me that says, "During COVID-19, I tip outrageously. It makes me feel lucky. I'm learning that grief and joy can overlap. Thank goodness. The only thing getting me through quarantine," you can't see it, but on the back of this postcard, the person wrote, "Frank, if you don't know what this is, it's weed." So you can see this broad spectrum of strategies and successes young people are coming up with to navigate their own journey. This one says, "For my own self-care, I created this portrait of my girlfriend. She's a nurse." And this tip, "I've been searching Amazon baby registries and sending gifts to strangers since they didn't get to have a baby shower," tying into an earlier conversation we had about how scientific evidence is demonstrating that acts of kindness not only help others, but make ourselves even happier. Just a couple more of these. 30-year-old male about to grab a beer and take a bubble bath. It was a rough day. My mantra is be a lovingly aggressive friend right now. I gave most of my stimulus money to a friend who didn't qualify. It made us both happy. You can see some patterns here about how people are discovering these really creative, low-tech ways of helping others and themselves, or themselves and others through that action. Sitting in your car outside of your house is self-care. I can't explain it, but if you know, you know. A definite real-world self-care tip. And just a couple more here. I thought this pandemic would confirm for the world what a coward I really am, but actually it's showing me how brave I can be. And finally, check on your friends. Seriously, do it. This is a time when all of us need to take a closer look at ourselves, our shadow selves, look to our friends, our family, and especially the people who are helping. Sometimes those who are contributing the most have the greatest sense of need and connection and compassion. It's never been more important to reach out to people close to us and just casual contacts and ask if you're okay. Yeah. On Twitter, I posted something recently, 3 ways to ask if you're okay, or to ask if someone's okay without asking them if they're okay. That's a mouthful, but I'll just end with this. These are 3 questions you can use for yourself or friends, family, to assess and make sure they know that you're a safe place to share if they need. This pandemic is starting to affect me. How about you? You don't seem like your usual upbeat self today. Anything you'd like to talk about or share? And so these are 3 questions you can ask to start that conversation that a friend might really want to have, but doesn't know how to take that first step. Mm-hmm. And 3 tips about these questions: listen carefully, ask twice, and share your own feelings too. If you can be vulnerable first, that allows others to feel comfortable telling their sensitive stories too.
Thank you. I can see these postcards the whole day. They're so beautiful and so encouraging. I think you touched upon what we talked about: vulnerability, kindness from across the world. Like, those are 2 important things for forming those connections, even in the time of pandemic. Yeah, very touching. Anthony, what are some techniques we can use to create an open, supportive environment where our friends feel safe to tell their deep truths?
Yeah, so having started with shadows, I'll invoke the word love in response to your question. We tend to think of love as being unconditional, but again, here I think the science suggests that this is not quite right. I'm thinking of a book by the psychologist Barbara Fredrickson called Love 2.0. And in that book, she really makes the case for the conditionality of love. And one of those conditions is safety, which we've discussed. You know, people don't experience love when they feel threatened. And so I think you're quite right to point out that safety is paramount for connection. I think one of the things that we can do for those we know and, you know, who may be in the shadows is to extend our empathy and to express our gratitude. You know, we often think of gratitude as one of those, you know, dopey emotions. I mentioned that I teach a course on the science of well-being, and one of the things that I ask my students to do is to think about a person who they've never properly thanked, and to write a letter of gratitude to that person, and then to arrange a time to meet the person, and finally to read the letter to that person aloud. I also tell them to, you know, bring lots of tissue. You know, we think that to express gratitude makes us look weak and feel awkward, but that's just not the case. You know, people enjoy hearing our gratitude, and it's a kind of, you know, booster shot for our relationships.
Thank you. That exercise is interesting. We are on the last leg, so I want to give some time to also the audience to ask questions. But before we do that, are there any key resources or books that you would recommend, any of you, for people to like take and then continue with this journey on their own?
Yeah, there's 3 books that I wanted to bring up. The first one obviously is Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication, which is just totally transformational. And then there's also this book called The Language of Emotions, What Your Feelings Are Trying to Tell You, which is pretty self-explanatory and just like really empowering. And then the third book that I've loved is Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, which is all about how the body internalizes trauma and holds trauma in different ways that you can start to process it and release it so that that trauma doesn't become mental illness. And that's like an incredible book.
Thank you.
I would just, I think I mentioned a couple of books at the start, I'll repeat them. Jamil Zaki, he has a book out called The War for Kindness. And the book that I just mentioned, Barbara Fredrickson, has a book out called Love 2.0.
Well, I want to say it's a great presentation when the panelist is jotting down notes during the conversation. And for resources, I've been writing for the past 5 or 10 minutes. I've got some great resources right here for myself. I would say if you visit Active Minds on the web, there are some great resources about how you can be there for friends and family and have the confidence to know what to say if somebody asks you for help. One surprising statistic is that young people, students, are 69% more likely to ask a friend for help about a mental illness than to confide it with a counselor or a parent or a professor. And that's even gone up higher during the pandemic. So it's important that we know what to say and we know how to say it. You don't have to be a professional, a doctor, you just have to be a good friend and care and listen and know about resources to take people to. So I would say Active Minds Online has great resources. And lastly, during this conversation of our shadow selves, I found it amusing how Anthony went from being into the shadow into the light, and the idea of bringing things up when he was talking about love and compassion. And so visually, it was nice to see that transformation. And maybe all of us are a little bit more enlightened after this presentation and about our shadow selves, where we are in this pandemic, and maybe have a couple extra tools about how we can help others.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. I actually planned this to happen. Ithaca is not the sunniest place and so it's a rarity that the sunshine actually shines. And when it shines on my face, it should be noted.
All right. If there are maybe a couple of questions that we can, if somebody has any from the audience, we can maybe take it. Okay. All right. So any last words, closing words for this fantastic panel? I learned so much. I wrote down notes from the beginning. So I'm definitely going to watch this again. But if you have any closing words, that'll be great.
I just want to say thank you very much for having me. And you guys can follow me on Instagram, and I'm going to continue this conversation of mental health there for sure. Yeah, and also you can grab my book at thebigdreambook.com. Oh, there it is. Thank you.
It's a fantastic one. So, yeah. Thank you, Dayle.
Well, I posted something on Instagram today. It's a picture of a heart, and it says, everybody has at least one secret that could break your heart. And that's something I've learned over the course of PostSecret. And just knowing that and feeling that, I think, gives us a greater sense of empathy and compassion, and maybe can help us help ourselves and help others during this temporary but challenging crisis. Free your secrets and become who you are. Tell your truth to your friends, your family, text, email. And if you don't have anybody to share your secret with, you can always put it on a postcard and mail it to PostSecret.
Thank you, Frank. Love PostSecrets. All right. Cool. I think, unless Dr. Anthony, if you have any, I know you did provide a lot of info today. So.
No, I just wanted to thank you and my other fellow panelists for making this possible on this very important day of recognizing, mental health globally. And if I can just plug the science here, the science of well-being, I think, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the observations that my other panelists have made are I think, echoed by the science. And so go science.
Everything comes together. So thank you for whoever was able to join us today. And thank you for the lovely panelists. And I think this will be available on the Mighty's Facebook page if somebody wants to watch it later as well. And if there are questions, you can post in the Mighty community and maybe somebody can answer if somebody still have lingering questions. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thanks, everybody. See ya.
Happy Friday.